you don't have to be to the nines in order to show up on camera and become a popular podcast. I think showing up as you and however you're showing up that day, I think that is an ingredient towards a successful podcast.
Create for No Reason is your weekly dose of inspiration to create what you believe should exist in the world. It's where passion meets craft, and we explore the joy of the creative process and building a meaningful body of work. I am so excited because today I am joined by my friend Mark Ronic. He is a leader in the world of podcasting. He is the founder of Ironic Media, which is the best name. He is the co-founder of Next Gen Podcaster and the visionary behind the Empowered Podcasting Conference. He has almost 20 years of experience in podcasting. And I know you might be thinking, wait a second, is podcasting even been around for 20 years? Yes, it has. And he has helped transform the landscape of audio and video content through cutting edge production, brand strategies, and AI-driven tools. So we talk all about podcasting. We talk about the creative process. We talk about some of the mindset challenges that people have when producing content and what that looks like. And what I love about this episode is that Mark shares strategies that he uses to get over some of the challenges that we put ourselves through when we are creating content. So there's a lot of things that he shared that you will be able to use so that you can do your most creative work. I hope you enjoy this episode. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. You're going to be the first person that I actually officially do my start to an interview like this. I'm going to warn you that I have ADHD, and there will probably be one or two moments during this conversation where I will be on a roll, and then I will just completely forget what the heck I'm saying. So it's just a forewarning to you that, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about when I'm a guest on podcasts. I don't usually give that warning, and it usually comes back to bite me. So for you and for your audience, just beware. I might forget once or twice what I'm talking about, and you might have to refresh my memory here and there.
Thank you for the disclaimer. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Good way to start it out. I feel like a lot of people listening are like, yep, that sounds like me. So
yeah, and I truly have ADHD. I'm not just saying, oh, I have ADHD, I might forget. Like, I truly have ADHD, and that is a thing that I continue to deal with, and I'm working on, but, it's a bit of a challenge.
It happens, and we're going to roll with it, Mark.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do.
Sure.
So let's dive right into podcasting, because I find it so interesting when people, with all the mediums out there, they choose one and they really stick to it. And that's what you've done with podcasting. You've done an incredible job doing it. So why choose podcasting as that medium that you feel like, I'm going to go all in on this?
Yeah, I will say one of the advantages for something that you just mentioned, as far as like you pick one platform and then people seem to stick to it. I think that's one of the things that I like about podcasting, is that I'm not confined to just podcasting. I could be if I want to, but it opens doors to all sorts of content creation, from social media to now I've been hired to be a creator for a brand. A brand pays me to make content for them now. So yeah, there's lots of different ways you can go with podcasting. And there are some people, and I respect that move too, that will just focus on that platform and mainly that platform and don't look to expand it any further. And that's cool. As far as why did I get into it? I mean, it really goes back to when I was in high school, maybe even a little younger. I became a super fan of a morning talk show on the radio, driving to school every morning and listening to these two guys goof off and have fun and be silly and make people laugh. And I just was really drawn to it. And my best friend and I both, we were drawn to it together. It was something we would often talk about. And then we just got this idea one day, because we knew these two guys would take calls and just shoot the S with their audience. We decided, let's start calling and trying to make these guys laugh. And we did. And we became kind of these regular characters almost on their show. We would call every so often with some shtick or whatever. And they ended up inviting us to come do an hour of their show. And, we were 16 years old, right? So this was like a huge deal for us. And yeah, we went there. We thought they were going to kind of sit in with us, but they literally left the room and left us with their producer and said, okay, guys, go for it. And we had an hour of their show to do. And it was a huge highlight in our lives. And it is for me to this day. And that gave me the bug. I was just drawn to being in front of a microphone like this and either entertaining, educating, adding value into people's lives. That's just something that I can't get enough of. So that's probably the reason why I got into podcasting.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. And they were, you were like, thanks for the opportunity. And they're like, yeah, thanks for the break. We're going to go be over here.
Exactly. Yeah. And they got some good PR out of that too, because, they brought in a couple of high school kids that, helped fulfill a dream of theirs. And yeah, so it was a win-win for everybody for sure. I ended up interning for those guys when I was in college a few years later. And then several years after that, the radio show had ended because the radio station had flipped formats, and the radio show decided we're going to do a podcast. And I was probably, 5 years or so into my journey at that time of podcasting specifically. And I reached out to them. I said, hey, I know you guys are just starting up. I know a few things about this. Do you want some help? And they brought me in. We talked, and I ended up being a producer, business manager, and a cast character on that show for several years. And to this day, it's still probably the biggest podcast that I've ever worked on. I mean, they were getting upwards of at that time, of 20,000 downloads a day, because they did a Monday through Friday show. So I got a ton of experience out of that too, and such a full circle moment as well.
So I had a dream, Mark, of being on the radio as well years and years ago. And after college, after I went to Florida State, and then I came home to in Boca at FAU, and I begged the guys over there to give me a show. And they actually said, why not? So after a few times of going in there and harassing them, they said, all right, we're going to give you this show. And so my friend Sarah and I had this show called Free for All with Kate and Sarah. And we just did this random show talking about, I don't even know, just Hollywood and gossip and all these things that I could care less about today. Mm-hmm. And we just did this show, and we ended up reaching out to a bunch of people to try to get them to on for an interview. And we got Carrot Top. We got Carrot Top to call in and be on the show. And it was like the highlight of our lives. We just couldn't believe that somebody actually said yes to an interview. And then we got to go to one of his shows and meet him. And it was a whole thing.
He's a good guy, isn't he? I've heard him on an interview actually recently on the Pete and Sebastian podcast, Sebastian Maniscalco, the comedian. And I really was surprised, because I really haven't heard a lot of interviews with Carrot Top, and he's a really good interview. He tells good stories, and he seems like a genuinely nice guy. Was that the case?
I mean, this is years ago, but I do remember that he was super nice. Obviously, so nice that he agreed to doing this random radio show with my friend and I, and then to invite us to the show, and we had a great time, and we got to stick around and meet him, and he was very nice. So yes, shout out to Carrot Top.
Yes. Who knew? I had no idea I would be having a conversation about Carrot Top today.
You never know. You just never know. So that's interesting that you were interested in radio and you got into podcasting. I think a lot of people, it doesn't happen that way, right? Like everyone kind of has their own little journey. So getting into actual podcasting, and when did you start the business to help people with their podcasts?
Yeah. So I actually started podcasting. I don't know the exact number, because back then when I started it, who knew that it would be a thing to even remember when you started podcasting? It was probably around 20 years ago that I started podcasting. So yeah, that makes sense when you think about it, because there was nothing else to look to but talk radio if that was something that you wanted to do, right? There weren't really a lot of podcasts out there, but there were some. And at the time I was and I still am for that matter, a big fantasy football guy. I enjoy playing fantasy football on the weekends, and there were some fantasy football podcasts out there that I enjoyed, and it started to make me think, you know what? I could do this. Why can't I do this? Nobody else, there's not a lot of people out there doing it. So I did. And that was the start of the journey. I ended up doing my own show with my close friend growing up. And that was a very successful show. And then I would say toward the end of 2019, I was working as a full-time TV producer. I hated the job. I loved the people. I just did not enjoy the job, mainly because it was a political talk show, and I am not a guy who likes to talk politics. So I decided I'm going to start helping people podcast. I've been doing it long enough. I know a thing or two. There's got to be something I can do to help other people. So I did that, on the side. But then I said it was the end of 2019. So come March, I was working full-time from home because the pandemic had come. So I was actually lucky enough. I had more time then to focus on this business and building the business. I was still able to get all my work done for the full-time job and then focus more on this. And by the end of 2020, I left that job and just went all in on this full-time.
I think a lot of people have this dream of doing some type of creative work on the side. They have a full-time job and then they want to start a YouTube channel, a podcast, or whatever. And for whatever reason, we stop ourselves from pursuing that creativity. When you're talking to all of these people that are wanting to start a podcast, what are some of the biggest challenges that they come to you to help solve? Is it more like tech or is it more mindset type stuff?
I think it's mindset more than anything. I mean, everybody, if you're brand new to podcasting, sure, you're going to have questions about tech. And that could even be something that's stopping you. I've certainly seen that, but I think the vast majority of new or potentially new podcasters that come to me, it's a mindset thing. They don't understand why anybody would want to listen to what they have to say. I'm no expert is a big quote I hear. So why should I be talking about this kind of thing? And to that, I would say, it's funny how a lot of us will say, I'm not an expert in this subject, but we're clearly motivated to say, start a podcast or a YouTube channel. We're motivated to do it because we've had experiences under that umbrella of whatever that is, right? So I just find it funny that the word expert people shy away from, even if you have a vast amount of experiences that you can speak to. And I think once people get that permission, like, it's okay that you don't have this certification or license. All you have to do is just tell your audience you're speaking from experience, right? You're sharing your personal experiences through whatever challenge or journey you're on. And that's going to click with an audience. There are going to be people out there that are going through something similar and just want to hear somebody else going through it and that they came out the other side. And you might pick up a tip or two as to how you can get yourself out from that where you are now to that other side. So that's one area. I think there's so many different mindset areas. I've had a client, one of my first clients hired me, paid me upfront, and then ghosted me for like 6 months. Would not answer my texts, would not answer my calls, emails, nothing. And I was starting to get a complex about it. Like, maybe I did something, but if I did, I would think they'd want their money back, right? So all of us just stayed persistent. And I reached out, I said, and she finally got back to me and I said, what's going on? She said, I was just too scared. I just was too scared. There wasn't like a big reason behind it. She just was really scared. And I think part of that is because it felt overwhelming. She didn't know what this was going to be involved. And I think was telling herself a lot of stories about what this might entail. And that is the whole purpose of why I do this, is to try to simplify it for people, because it can be a lot if you let it be a lot. And I know, Kate, you've been in the grind of this before, right? And it can get overwhelming quickly if you let it. So that, to me, is my responsibility with all of these years of doing this, is to help people keep it simple yet very effective, depending on what their goals are.
So how did you help her get out of that fear? It was almost like she put the skin in the game. She paid. She said, I'm all in. I'm going to do this. And then that fear came up, obviously, so much so that it prohibited her from actually getting started. So how did you work through that so that you can actually take that first step?
I think it's just being a human being, right? So first of all, she saw me being persistent. And I think even though it took her a long time, the fact that she saw that she had somebody in her corner encouraging her to get started was one factor, at least enough so to finally get her to pick up the phone. And then it was just what I said to you. It's a matter of me talking it through. What's bothering you? What's holding you back? And then it's me showing that I will help alleviate that. If not get rid of it, I could, depending on what it is, but ultimately it's I'm here in your corner. You don't have to do it alone. And I think that helps a lot of people take that first step, because it's scary doing something like this, putting yourself out there like this by yourself to a lot of people. So just being that partner, that collaborator, was, I think, enough to finally make the difference to get her to get started. And she's still doing it today, and she is still probably one of the more popular podcasts that I produce to this day. So I'm glad that she finally took the leap.
Yeah, you have to take the first step. And the first step is the scariest, because you're going into the unknown. There is so much uncertainty. And when it comes to creating content of any kind, man, we really are our own worst critic.
I am to this day.
Oh my gosh.
Myself. Yeah.
So tell us about a time when you were podcasting, you were creating content, and you felt some of those mindset things, whether it's imposter syndrome or perfectionism or something that kind of you had to work through in order to actually continue to create your work.
Man, I guess that probably happened an hour ago. I'm sure of it. Whenever I'm creating content, I definitely will have a moment or two at least where I feel like I'm just wasting my time. Like it's not good, or I just can't come up with an idea, but I know there's something there, but I just can't figure out how to flesh it out. And I start questioning everything. I mean, it can be, I could have the whole idea. Let me think of something for you. So I tried to do daily LinkedIn posts, because as you know, I do a daily podcast about podcasting. So what I try to do is, from that conversation I had that morning, I will try to come up with something that I can share with LinkedIn and share with that community of podcasters. And it goes without fail. One of the parts I struggle with the most is that opening line, right? That, or as the experts call it, the hook. To me, I will agonize over that, because I know how valuable that first line is, especially when it's short form content. You've got to hook them in, and I will sit and judge it and judge it and judge it and refine it. And it comes to a point where I finally have to say, all right, you got to pick something, go with it, right? Because otherwise I will beat myself up about it all day long. So it's one of those things where at some point, one of the tactics I've had is I'll set up like a timer if I'm working on a certain project like that. And it's like, when that timer goes off, if I haven't come up with something, I got to go back and pick through one of the things I had decided on at some point. So that's one area where I still haven't quite figured it out yet. I think I'm getting there with the timer thing. It's helped, but I just want to be able to write something down, put it out there, and be okay with it if it doesn't do well. right? That's the big thing. And by well, I mean, we all have different definitions of that. But really, to me, I want to create something that people are going to connect with and engage with. So yeah, it's just, I want to be at that point where just put it out there and be okay. And I'm getting there. The doing it, the repetition, like LinkedIn, I really try to do it Monday through Friday. That eventually gets me to a point where it's like, okay, here's another day. Do I really want to go through the hair pulling out again? Or do I just want to get something done that I know has value to offer? So those are some of the ways I'm working on building that up for myself.
That is a great strategy, using the timer. And it's almost like you're now putting a little bit of constraint on it, because if you give yourself all day to create something, you're going to work on it all day instead of, hey, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes. I'm going to put something together. And I love that you shared it's really the practice. It's getting in the reps. If you just keep doing it every day, that's the only way it's going to get easier. And by easier, it doesn't even mean that you're going to be comfortable with it all the time.
No,
Like-
no. I mean, it's rare that I'm really comfortable with it. I mean, and I know you know this too. When I get into the flow of it and I'm finished with it, like I'm usually very proud of the content that I've put out. And so, yeah, to what we're saying here with these reps, it's just that you get more used to it. And you also get tired of it, right? If you do it every day and you're struggling every day and judging yourself every day, at least for me, it gets to a point where it's tiring and I don't have the time to deal with my silly back talk in my head. So just doing it over and over again has been a big help.
You mentioned getting the hook right. And that's something where I know when I think about some of my creative projects, I get real stuck on these are the best practices. These are what everyone say that you need to do. And there's all of these articles and to get a viral video and to get seen and to grow your audience. And there's all these things that you quote unquote should do or have to do in order to get ranked and all the listicles out there.
Yeah.
So how do you think about the creative process and being able to kind of have that balance between, yes, of course, using those things and keeping them in mind, but also being true to your creativity and creating something that you feel like is valuable, even if it doesn't have all of these steps that someone said should be included?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I learned it the hard way. And I think what it comes down to is it's first learning those strategies, right? Like, yeah, take on those strategies. What are you hearing the experts saying? Or if you hired that person, what are they asking you or suggesting that you do? Go through those motions, learn how to do those things, and understand that you don't have to be committed to those things. Learn what works best for you, adopt that. And again, it goes back to the reps. Keep implementing it, do it over and over and over again, and then it starts to become habit or second nature. So once that occurs, then that creative part will come out much more easily because you're not up against the semantics. Instead, now you've got the semantics. Now you're just focusing on the creative part of it. So it's give yourself permission to be able to learn it without putting so much expectation on it. And then once you've learned it, apply what works for you. And I think that really is the key. At least it has been for me.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that constraint, right? Like you give yourself some constraints on what it should or what you want it to include every time. And then, hey, I'm going to test this. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to see what works.
And the other thing is that a lot of us will get so hung up on what the expert advice is and that this works and that doesn't work. But if you really start to pay attention to the videos out there that go viral, they're usually not following those rules unintentionally, right? They're just a natural video. There's something about the video itself that caught the attention that everybody started sharing and commenting on and engaging with. So it's funny because, yes, I think that I think it's important for us to look at these things just as suggestions and strategies and find what works best for us and what our audience responds to, and not put so much pressure in making the gospel.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting is sometimes it's just the person. There are people that have videos that are 30 minutes long and they're saying and and people are captivated by them.
Yeah.
They just have this, there's something about them, and not everyone could get away with that. So it really, that's what I find so interesting too, is like when you see people, some people that blow up, it's almost, sometimes I just look at it like, how did that even happen? And it really just is their personality. And so you have to consider all of those pieces. There's so many different criteria that go into the mix of all this stuff. And that's why I love encouraging people to really share what it is that they want to share and in the way in which they want to share it, just to kind of, it's your own unique ability. When comedians talk about it, right? It takes them years and years to develop what is their persona, what is their point of view. And it takes a long time, but every comedian has a certain point of view. It makes them a little bit unique, special, different, and everybody kind of needs that in their content. And so you can kind of start to see it. Like I see it in your work, in what you're creating and what you put out in the videos that you do. It's very, it's very professional, but it's fun. It's to the point. I know I'm going to get some kind of a tip that I can use when I do my next podcast. And so you've kind of created this is what I can expect from Mark. And there's something really wonderful about that. And I think people are gravitated towards that, whether they know it or not. There's that familiarity.
Yeah, for sure. And, something you said, I don't even know what it was, but something you said triggered something to one of your earlier questions that I feel like it's important to share. You were asking about some of these mindset issues that people have when they first get started, or even in some cases, some of these examples I have for you is more about that you may have already been podcasting for a while, but one of the big things I hear is I hate the sound of my voice and nobody's going to want to listen to my voice. It's really annoying, right? And I have felt that way about myself for years, and I still do, quite frankly. I don't consider my voice a professional radio style voice, right? And the truth of the matter is, actually, one of those guys from that radio show, he became really a mentor of mine. And the best piece of advice he ever gave me was, it's not about the sound of your voice. It's about how you use it. And that has always stuck with me. And it's been proven over the years because I've had many people come to me and tell me that they think I've got that voice for podcasting. Like they say, what do you do? I'm a podcaster. Oh, of course you're a podcaster. You have that voice. And I look at them like they're crazy. Like, what do you mean I have the voice for it? I don't sound like those pros that I worked with for several years that have these deep booming voices. But it really does come down to, I learned how to use my voice. If you go back and listen, and I have one of the recordings of like from 2005, and you hear that voice, it's the same tone, but I am not confident. You can hear that there is a lot of years of experience waiting for me when you listen back to that recording. So it's the sound of the voice thing, and it's also how they look on camera, right? And it could be even the most beautiful people in the world. Still, it could be about, sure, they may know and be confident that they're a nice looking person, but then it's a problem of, well, I've got to show up and look my absolute best, right? And I think that can hurt a podcast sometimes, because I think people want to see that genuine person in a host. They want to see that host looks like them, acts like them, sounds like them, right? So I think that people have to also give themselves permission to just show up. And it's really about what you're saying. It's not about how you look. It doesn't matter if you've got the makeup or the hair done. And I will say, I still, though, I do a morning show, right? So it's roll out of bed, meditate, exercise, do some personal stuff, and then get right to the show. And I'm not ready, camera ready, quote unquote, but I will, this is where I'm going with this. I will still go and fix my hair before I go and hit record on the video. So I get it, but I think that you don't have to be to the nines in order to show up on camera and become a popular podcast. I think showing up as you and however you're showing up that day, I think that is an ingredient towards a successful podcast.
And it's almost like show up as you show up, right? Like one of the best things, one of the best compliments that you can get from people that have read your book, listened to your podcast, watch your videos is if they meet you in person and they say, "Oh my gosh, you're exactly the way that you are on your podcast." And so could you imagine if you're dressed to the nines every single time that you're doing a podcast, but you never dress to the nines when you're just like hanging out? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. So you want to give people, like I have a girlfriend of mine, she gets her hair and makeup done every day. She's like, I mean, it's a thing. That is who she is in daily life. Right. So on camera, she's especially that way because, but it goes well for her. Yeah. And so everyone has to be comfortable.
It's a great point, Kate. I mean, I think that is what it comes down to. It's however you show up day to day with people outside of the podcast, show up that way on the podcast too. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, that's when people are then you're going to find your true fans, people that are like, I really like Mark because we're the same or he really teaches me or whatever it is. I mean, that's a whole other podcast. Yeah.
It makes me relatable.
So what are some unexpected or surprising lessons that you've learned in the years of content creation that you have had?
Wow, that's a good question. What is something that I've learned that maybe surprised me? I mean, one of them is really what I just shared with you about my voice. And I think what it surprised me about creating content is that I had no idea how much it was going to improve my confidence in myself. I think that even since I started this business, there's something about putting yourself out there, sharing your knowledge with other people, publicly putting it out there, that at least for me started giving me the confidence because, yeah, I knew how to do all of these things, but I never really shared it with a lot of people. So I just thought, it's just something I do and maybe most people know how to do it, right? Or they don't care. But what it turns out is the moment I started putting out my knowledge and sharing it in creative ways, people respond to it and my confidence starts to go up. I start to realize, well, there's more to this than me just doing a silly little podcast. That this is a bigger thing. And I'm now, I mean, looking back 5 years ago to today, I am so much more confident in what I'm talking about. And that was something I never thought I would learn or adopt, but through creating podcasts. I just never realized that.
How did that increased confidence help you in your creative process when it came to actually figuring out what am I going to talk about? What are these episodes going to be about?
I think really what it was learning that I'm not the only one through my clients. My clients were like mirrors of me. The things that they struggled with were things I was struggling with, just maybe in a different area, right? Like for me, I was trying to break into social media to help build my business, help build my podcast. And that felt very new and different to me. And I was lacking the confidence or judging the content. And my clients were doing the same thing when it came to podcasting. So yeah, I was able to relate to them. And yeah, and by the way, here's one of those moments where I really kind of lost my track of where I was going to go with that. But I think I got the gist of it out for you. But yeah, it was just a matter of learning from my clients that they're going through it too. And yeah, that helps me a lot. It really does.
That's why we love podcasts and videos, because we hear other people going through those same challenges we are, and we're thinking, oh, okay, so we're not the only ones. Yeah. I will never forget when I started hearing people like Tim Ferriss or any of the big podcasters, and they would talk about how they have imposter syndrome sometimes, or
Yeah,
they're
right.
striving to be, I always talk about how Damon John, he said to his audience, you guys are looking at me thinking I want to be like Damon. Meanwhile, he's looking at Richard Branson thinking I want to be like Richard Branson. So everyone kind of has these ideas of where they want to go. And if you're out there and you're creating and you're putting work out into the world, then it's only human to feel this little bit of potentially some insecurity. And is this going to go anywhere? And is this a thing? Or
Yeah, not being the only one, realizing there are a lot of people going through it, that changes everything. At least it has for me.
yeah. And that goes for anything in life,
Mm.
whether you're going
Mhm.
through a hardship at a job or a health issue or divorce or anything. Someone has gone through exactly what you're going through, and when we don't have community, we feel this we can get into that hole of I'm the only one, when really when you do start to reach out to other people or find really great resources, you're able to then get into that place of empowerment and okay, I'm going to move forward because these people can do it and I'm going to do it. So
Yeah.
going into community, some of your who are some people that you go to for inspiration? And if it's not a who, what resources do you go to when you need some
Mm.
creative inspiration?
Yeah, okay. So one person that I can name, and I actually interviewed her a couple of months ago. Her name is Heather Parody, and Heather does really, I think, some of the best short form content that she's creating from her podcast. And she's doing it in a way that most podcasters aren't. So, what is she doing? She's actually telling a story. She's taking a piece of their discussion, her and her guests, and she's telling you a story. It's not just that clip. It's not just a clip like of that big moment that happened during the show. That's part of the short form content. But what she's doing is she's coming on camera, she's delivering a strong hook to her social media audience, whatever that topic is, like how to deal with imposter syndrome. She's got a hook right around that wraps her audience in. She's setting it up with a little bit of storytelling, and she's working the content from her podcast into that storytelling as like a complement to that lesson or to that story, as opposed to just resting on the clip itself. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. And I love that. In fact, with my other podcast, Lead with Culture, there are some episodes that I actually do an intro and then I play a clip of Matthew Kelly because he has very short clips. And so I play a clip from him and then I do an intro, play his clip, and then I kind of do an outro of what people can, because his clips are very short. So I do a little, what can you take from it? Here are some exercises to consider, and here are kind of ways to take what he is teaching us and actually implement it into your life. So it sounds very similar, but I really like that idea of actually taking a piece from a podcast interview that you've done.
Yeah, and then right, telling a whole story. Like she'll also quote or use clips from other podcasts or other TV shows that help move the story along, that help make it more impactful. And I love that about her content. And I also pay attention the things that she does. She uses quick flashes on the screen to transition from one scene to the next. She's got high production value. So people like her, she's one that immediately comes to mind. But if I couldn't come up with anybody, that's what I do is I take some time every day. And yes, I'll go and do the scroll thing and sometimes go through rabbit holes. And a lot of that is because I'm studying people's content. What is it about this? Why was this shown to me by the algorithm? Clearly, it was something popular. So what makes this video popular? It's usually either the content, the production value, the way that the content's delivered. Like those are the things that I pay attention to and learn from, and then try to incorporate in a lot of the content that I make.
Well, shout out to Heather, and
Yes.
it is a good reminder to, hey, if you're scrolling anyway, just kind of scroll and have your mindset shift a little bit and scroll into, how can I create better content or think about things a little bit differently in the work that I'm doing, in whatever creative work that you're doing, to be able to as Austin Kleon says, steal like an artist.
Yes. And it can be a little dangerous for me too sometimes, because imposter syndrome is a thing for me too sometimes. And you have to be in the right mindset to do that educational scrolling, because otherwise I know for me, I'll stop on somebody who does something similar than I do, and I see that content in it and I'm like, wow, that was awesome. Why would anybody want to come and work with me when there's content like that out there, right? Like I'll definitely have to keep myself in check sometimes. So you definitely want to do that with a healthy mindset if you're going to do that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. That's a whole other rabbit hole as well. All right, Mark, what is one activity that people can do in 10 minutes or less to spark their creativity?
I am so glad you asked me this question, because this is actually a newer thing for me, and it has really helped me a lot with my creativity. I used to say one of the hardest things for me in a content creation process is getting started, working with that blank slate. And I used to say AI, and AI is still absolutely a thing for me, where it at least helps get me started. I can go to AI like a Chat GPT and say, I have this general idea, and build off of it using some assistance from artificial intelligence. But lately, I recently heard an interview, and I wish I could remember where I heard it, and I can't right now, but this is not my idea, but I'm stealing it. It was a matter of when you're working on something, a creative project, sometimes when we're in the flow, we have to stop because of life or distractions, maybe a client calls, whatever it is, we have to stop. So what I have found when I learned is that stop halfway. Like if you're in the middle of writing a sentence for like a script or an outline, stop in the middle and walk away. Because what that does for me is later, when it's time to come back and get back into that, now I actually have a launching point. I can say, oh, yeah, I remember where I was going with that, or I can see where I was going with that, and then I can just get right back into flow that way. Prior to that, what I used to do, I would just, find a good place to stop, right? Like, okay, this is good. I feel like this is a good place to stop. I can come back and get started again. But then it's like starting with that blank piece of paper, because now it's like, okay, but now what? So being able to literally stop in mid-sentence or mid-design and come back to it really gets me back into flow a lot quicker.
I heard that Ernest Hemingway did that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he
Then
would
it's an
stop.
old school thing.
Oh, it's a super old school thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he would stop his sessions in the middle of a sentence so he knew where to pick up. And so I think that's kind of a good little tip for people, because then you never have that quote unquote writer's block, whatever that looks like. And so you always kind of have this place to start. Cool. All right. I like that.
I've been really enjoying that. And I can't believe that's as old as Ernest Hemingway, but I'll take it. I mean, it's new to me, and it's been a real helpful part of my process, because getting the middle, if I'm having to get back into it, it's just really challenging. So that I highly encourage.
All right, we'll have to fact check the Ernest Hemingway thing, but I'm pretty sure that that's what I think. I remember hearing that from someone. All right, Mark, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your creative process in podcasting and content creation, and also for being vulnerable and sharing some of the challenges that you're dealing with, because I think that's really one of the reasons why I love doing this show, is to talk to people that are doing creative work, whether or not they put it out into the world. We all have these kind of same challenges, and to be able to talk about them, so like we were saying, so people can feel like, oh, I'm not alone. People feel like this, and we're able to get through it, and we're able to produce creative work that people feel so called to do. And so I appreciate you sharing everything that you did today, and so good to see you, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome. And I appreciate being on this show. I've seen and heard episodes, and I'm just glad to be a part of it now. So thank you, Kate.
And there you have it. I told you there were some good little strategies in there so that you can use to get over some of the mindset challenges that we go through whenever we're creating any kind of content. If we are a creator in any way, we're not alone. We all deal with these same things, which is why they resonate with so many people, which is why so many people continue to create content around them, because we need this information. We need to be reminded that we're not alone. We're dealing with challenges, but that should never stop us from pursuing our creativity and putting work out into the world that we believe is going to make an impact in other people's lives. If you want to reach out to Mark directly and learn a little bit more about how he can help you get your podcast out into the world, then you can go to ironicmedia.com. I will put the link in the description. You can also go over onto Instagram and follow him, because he shares a lot of really great free content to help you get started in your podcasting journey. Or if you're already a podcaster, he shares some really great stuff about how to think about your content, how to become a better interviewer, some things to consider before you start your podcast, or some things to consider to improve your podcast that you already have. So definitely check him out on Instagram, and I will put his handle in the notes as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, go create something.